Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for what I know will be a great conversation, connecting corporations to Black enterprises. My name is Jean Smart, and I'm a managing director in the Corporate and Institutional Advisory Group here at UBS. We focus in three areas. We provide employer-sponsored plans such as retirement, equity compensation, and financial wellness to private and publicly held companies. We also have specialized teams to service our participant employees and support our financial advisors. In addition, we have a team dedicated to the mass affluent, focused solely on strategic initiatives and partnerships. I'm responsible for market strategy, competitive intel, and marketing. Today's event is a collaboration between Project Entrepreneur, a program by UBS, and the We Suite. Project Entrepreneur is on a mission to change the status quo for female founders, helping them get access to resources, networks, and financing they need to grow their companies. Thank you to Dee Spalding, founder of the We Suite, for your partnership and hosting this conversation today. You're an inspiration, a master connector of amazing women, and someone I call a friend. I met Dee a few years ago and quickly came to realize she cuts through all the fat. So every meeting and opportunity channels the best outcome for women founders. And like the panelists you'll hear from today, she's amazing. So why is UBS focused on entrepreneurs? We know that driving change that matters requires leadership. That means working to level the playing field for female founders, like many of you watching today who want to build and grow your companies. And as the world's largest global wealth manager, UBS has a long-standing history of helping entrepreneurs succeed, in part because many of the clients represent first-generational wealth and built their portfolios as entrepreneurs. Today's event is focused on Black female founders, the fastest growing segment of all entrepreneurs and among our economy's most vital and dynamic asset. We know that Black female founders have the drive, talent, and vision, but what they often lack is access to meaningful revenue opportunities. The fact is, women entrepreneurs are at a disadvantage when it comes to lending and investments. The Kauffman Foundation's Capital Access Lab shows that Black founders are 3 times less likely than white founders to receive approval for loans. And we know that Black women receive just 0.0006% of overall VC funding. There are a lot of zeros in that number. Last year in 2019, Black and Latino founders raised just 2.6% of total VC funding, despite the fact that they represent 32% of the US population. But what we should be talking about today is how to make the purchasing power of corporations more inclusive. Companies today need to rethink how they do business and more equitably, and quite frankly, be more effective, make more effective business decisions. Because Black founders, makers, and creators have historically been shut out of the capital they need to grow, they rely more heavily on the revenue to fuel their businesses. That means forging new enterprise partnerships that could be catalytic for Black female-owned companies. I am thrilled and honored to kick off this important and timely conversation. We hope this event elevates the dialogue and accelerates the success of Black female founders we want lasting, tangible outcomes. Let me introduce Dee, who will be moderating the panel discussion today. Dee Poku Spalding is the founder and CEO of the We Suite, a membership community and platform for women leaders and creators. In addition to providing members with the community and tools to succeed in the workplace, Dee supports brands and corporations with diversity and culture building initiatives. She'll share our agenda and introduce you to the panelists today. These women are incredible and innovative leaders who will help us decipher the supplier diversity chain and eliminate these roadblocks for women founders? Dee.
Well, thank you so much for the kind introduction, Jean. I really appreciate it. And I want to just start by thanking the entire UBS Project Entrepreneur team, Jamie Sears, Jean, Wendy Prisker, and Aiko for supporting this initiative. So I'm wearing two hats. I am the founder of the WeSuite, which is a membership community. But today I'm here in my capacity as the founder of Black Women Raise, but also just as a Black founder going through many of the issues that we are going to discuss today. Despite starting businesses at 15 times the national average, Black women receive a fraction of the investment capital that other founders do. And that's why I created Black Women Raise a couple of years ago to bridge the gap and to connect Black founders to funders. And then over the summer, in light of the increased scrutiny on the sort of rights and equity within the Black community, I saw a number of corporations pledging to diversify their workforces and to diversify their sort of supplier and vendor chains. But a number of them, or sort of a lot of them, have cited pipeline issues as an impediment to progress. So it really sort of got me thinking about the sort of heavier reliance that Black founders have on revenue in comparison to their white male counterparts, because they don't have the same access to investment capital. And it also got me thinking about our consumer spending powers. So the Black community is unparalleled with its sort of $1.3 trillion annual spending. So where does that money go, and how can we ensure that corporate dollars are allocated to ensure wholesale investment back into Black-owned businesses and into Black communities? And that's really what the Power of 8 is about. It's really an extension of the work that we've been doing on Black Women Raise, but specifically focused on connecting Black founders to decision makers at corporations. So I am so honored to have three truly, truly incredible women here with me today to explore this topic of how we drive more meaningful partnerships between the corporate sector and diverse founders. Over to my panelists. I don't know if this is your bottom left, but it's mine. It's Marla Blow. She is the North America lead at the Mastercard Center for Inclusive Growth. Prior to that, she was a founder. She's founder and CEO of FS Card, a subprime credit card venture, which she sold. She has a breadth of consumer finance knowledge as an executive, as a federal regulator, as an entrepreneur, as an angel investor, and public and private board service. Next to her, we have Lisa Skeete Tatum. She is the founder and CEO of Landit, a personalized career pathing platform created to support women and diverse groups in the workplace. Previously, Lisa was a general partner with Cardinal Partners, a $350 million venture capital firm. And prior to that, she had senior roles at Procter & Gamble and at GE Capital. And finally, but by no means least, we have April Crichlow, who is Global Vice President and Head of Marketing at SAP SuccessFactors. She has over 20 years of global marketing experience in high-tech industry with leadership across brand, demand generation, and consumer adoption. Prior to joining the SAP SuccessFactors business, she was Vice President, Global Customer and Ecosystem Marketing for SAP Ariba. Did we lose someone? Oh yes, we lost Wendy. Okay, so let's dig in because there is a lot to cover. I'm going to start with you, Marla, and just ask the broad question. I mean, I know why I think this initiative makes sense and why we need to have deeper connections between the corporate sector and Black founders. But for you as a former founder and now at a corporation, so you sort of have experience of both sides of the coin, what would you say are the key benefits to an initiative like this?
Well, thank you, Dee. It's a pleasure to be here, and good afternoon to everyone, including the other panelists and to the audience. I think this topic is an incredibly important one, and I think it can really be a difference maker when it goes well. It is a very difficult balancing act to work with large corporates because there are so many things that corporations have to coordinate internally. So all that time while you're waiting for something to come out of a big company, there is a massive internal process. But when that process turns in the favor of a small company, and that small company becomes a friend of a big company, it can be a game changer. It can really add jet fuel to what a company is doing. And I think it's really about just the kind of access that large corporations can provide. And I've been on, like you said, on both sides of the table, right? And at FS Card, even if we punched above our weight, things are going really well. Nobody had really heard of FS Card, right? So I try as I might to build a profile and be active in the arena in our industry. It was work to establish us on the land, in the landscape. Versus I sit at Mastercard right now. There are a lot of misconceptions about Mastercard and what it does. Like most people think it's a credit card company. It's fine, right? Like everybody's heard of Mastercard. And when Mastercard comes knocking or Mastercard wants to talk about something, that's an easy call to make, right? There's much more inbound. And so that kind of access, that kind of market influence, the size of the platform and that position, and being able to leverage it is the thing, and kind of borrow it by affiliation and through affiliation is, I think, the biggest piece of what a big company has to offer. The internal experts and resources, and I think a lot of people think like, well, what I'm really looking for is money, right? Flat out. But even if you can't get the money, and a lot of times corporations have varying internal policies about making direct investments, you still have incredibly skilled people. They are well-trained. There are massive investments in most of these companies in developing data scientists and marketing professionals and every other skill set up and down the board. Take advantage of that, build those relationships. And then I think the holy grail is to find some kind of commercial relationship. If you can figure out how to sell into or sell alongside and get yourself integrated into some solution of a large corporation, that is a win and a half. So I think there are a lot of ways that this can make a ton of sense for a small company.
Absolutely, I love all of that. And I actually do remember when I made the switch. I used to work for Paramount Pictures, and when I made the switch from being an executive to being a founder, it was like such a shock to my system. Not having the sort of backing of that sort of corporation and that identity behind me. So, so much of what you said really resonates. I want to come to you, April, and speak to you as someone who, SAP is a provider of business application software. And so you rely on outside founders to help sort of augment what you do internally. But I'd love you to sort of speak to how, the benefits really of having founders as enterprise partners for SAP.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think I'll start off by saying that SAP as an overall purpose from our brand perspective has always been to help the world run better and improve people's lives. And a big way that we do that is with and through our ecosystem. I think in the enterprise software world, we've long partnered with ecosystem partners like system integrators and consultants and resellers. But more and more in the last number of years, I've seen a huge focus and acceleration on working with our ecosystem as it relates to founders. And they really are providing, a diverse point of view that helps us to maximize our offerings to our customers and filling in sort of these experience gaps, I would say, in specific areas that allows us to bring a full customer, suite to our customers. So for us, we see it as a win-win because we can bring our enterprise, platform self forward. And then these founders, whether it's a product or a service, special offering, it helps us to sort of enrich our offerings again to the with and through our ecosystem. And I think we've always had this long heritage of working with many different kinds of partners, but now really seeing this increased focus on founders, whether it's application extensions or endorsed applications, or whether it's even just partnering from a values and a purpose perspective. So, and I think you're seeing this as a trend, not even a trend, but just sort of, it's sort of table stakes now that major corporations, I think, have to make a stand to, open up their ecosystem in that way. So, it's an exciting time because it really does allow us to expand our offerings to customers.
Yeah, I agree that it's an exciting time. And I want to bring Lisa in because April spoke to the sort of filling in the experience gap. And that's very much what you are doing very, very successfully at Landit. I'm quite curious about, you have sort of a lot of very sort of blue chip clients, but I'm sure it didn't start off that way.
Of course it did.
You just hit
Yeah.
the ground running. So just tell us a little bit more about just how you got started and how you started to sort of build those blocks and sort of work your way into that corporate ecosystem.
For sure. Well, for us, it was all about scale, reach, and revenue because we knew that even though our product was focused on individuals owning their career, that the way we were going to get there the fastest was through customer acquisition or big customer acquisition, because in that case, success was aligned. But corporate customer is not a corporate customer is not a corporate customer. So for us, it was we had to get lighthouse customers up front, day one, ones that other people would follow, ones that would validate our model, but that would give us a little bit of leeway to go through the rough patches, right? Because in the beginning, you want to be proximate to whomever that is so you can get the learning so that you can make the mistakes in a way that aren't going to be fatal, because there are some where they're not willing to partner with you in that way. And then really getting down to what does success look like? So not only do you need that blue chip customer, but one that's going to work with you in a way that you can power through to the other side. So we sourced them in three ways. The first was introduction. You're not going to get at the level and at that type of customer without someone making an introduction. So we leverage customers, family members, advisors, particularly for founders of color, who you surround yourself in the beginning. Those are like your proxies for success. So we leaned heavily on our advisors to make the intros. And the other was just brute force visibility. So wherever the customers were, I made sure I was there or someone on my team so that we started to build that thought leadership. And in our case, individuals often pulled us into their companies. And then at the end of the day, you want customer referrals. So you have to do everything you can to make sure that that first customer is successful so that they become a reference for the next. And so that was really the key of how we got started. And I remember that board meeting was, are you going to go for the individual or are you going to go the corporate? And given some of the stats that you all mentioned, we said, you know what, if we want to have a chance at success and meeting our vision, we have to go the other way.
Interesting. And so you had that sort of first corporate client who really, obviously took a chance on you and helped you sort of build those blocks. So, what was that first experience like as far as making your way through the chain? So there was initial interest in the service that you provided. But then what was the sort of due diligence process and then I guess ultimately a sort of onboarding process that you had to navigate as well?
Oh, indeed. So I will say the one thing I learned when I used to be a VC is that you can't be a nice to have. So if you are a small company trying to break in, you have to be laser focused on what is the pain point that you're solving. And then you become that master of storytelling. So I also learned that particularly for a big company, if you are a little company trying to go into that whole system, you had better show up as being frictionless. So as someone told me early on, make it easy for them to spend the money with you. So we learned very early on, just say 3 steps. And if it was more than 3 steps, we weren't going to get through. So how did we communicate how easy it was for them to do business with Landit? And then answering that question, how are they going to win? So that we didn't look like risk. Small companies and sometimes founders of color companies look like risk. So our diligence was our lighthouse customer. That's why you got to start with that first. metrics, metrics, metrics. Just like fundraising is like getting a root canal, it can be the other way as well if you don't have the metrics to prove that you can deliver the goods. And then you may have to start with the pilot. So we didn't walk in there saying we want, all 100,000 of your employees. It is, let's start with one. But then we made the process easy. We have a really tight diligence binder. So there's none of this, oh, Lisa, we have this question, this question. It's like, here's the diligence. And then we had an onboarding book, everything down to here's the language that you can use when you're communicating with your stakeholders. Again, if you look at all the things they have to do, you don't want to show up as someone who's not a solution. And then we realized, and it was painful, that at the end of the day, customer success makes the difference. So we started doing things even before we closed of doing the check-ins up front. So you do all that stuff in the beginning to pave the way as you go forward.
Great advice. Thank you. Lisa, I want to, not Lisa, Marla, I want to pose the same question to you because I know that at FS Card, you also built an ecosystem of corporate partners, and that's how you grew the company. So tell me more about how you went about that process.
Yeah, I wish I had talked to Lisa actually ahead of time, because all of the advice that Lisa just gave is really sage advice that I learned the really hard way. And it would have been nice to learn it the easy way by listening to the voice of Lisa's expertise.
You don't see these wrinkles, Marla? That wasn't easy.
I think the relationships that we were able to build were the only way for us to go to market, right? We were issuing a traditional credit product in the market, and that was intentional, that was deliberate. And that meant we needed a bank that was going to be able to issue the cards on our behalf and allow us onto the rails of, in this case, it happened to be Mastercard, unrelated to my work at Mastercard now, but we wanted to issue a Mastercard branded product. And there are specific limitations about being able to get on that network. So we were going to have to make that work. There were some complexities that made it a lot harder. So Lisa's feedback on try to find a way to make it simple, cannot emphasize that enough. It was complicated for us for a number of reasons. We're in a heavily regulated space, and so it meant we had to put in a few extra parts, but still it took a lot of doing. And I think what you have to have is something that I guess I would describe as, what is your armor piercing talent, right? Like, what is it that you bring to this party that none of these organizations can bring on their own? And that, in our case, was our expertise on being able to build a cutting edge model and run a test in a limited way that did not in any way implicate the rest of the corporation, right? So if you think about one of the reasons why large corporations end up becoming risk averse is that everything they do exposes the franchise. They can partner up with small companies and run small scale tests or in a limited population or sort of not under their own name. And it doesn't jeopardize a multi-billion-dollar business that they already have. Or it doesn't infringe on their existing infrastructure that might not be able to integrate. And doing the work of integration can follow down the path after it's been demonstrated to work. But I think that thing you have to be able to true back to, right? It's in order to leverage this artificial intelligence enabled model. That is what my team brings to the table. And you guys don't want to wade into the world of artificial intelligence where the regulations are not clear. You have a bank charter that you're trying to protect, right? That is your goose that lays your golden egg. Let us demonstrate the viability of this super quant model that we know how to build, and then leverage that to make credit decisions in a very advanced way. But that ultimately is the thing that they know we have kind of as our own little golden egg, right? That we can produce as well. And so I think that understanding is critical, because otherwise doing the dance with large corporations can become very, very challenging. And as I mentioned, you can run out a runway, right? Waiting for a large corporation to make a decision. So have to have some kind of forcing mechanism, something that is of interest to keep that situation moving forward. But if you have it, again, you've got the thing that you need.
I'd love the idea of digging into this forcing mechanism, because it's definitely a process that a dance that I've had to do as well with corporations, where you just kind of can't seem to get to the finish line. And so, April, I want to ask you, and also maybe we can bring Lisa into this part of it, because, unexpected boon is that you guys also have a sort of business relationship, which I, hadn't known. And so it's like a bonus for this discussion. So maybe we can use that as a case study for how to do this properly.
Yeah, well, I can start and say, a lot of organizations now, I think are kind of trying to formalize or build programming around how do you bring in founders and how do you bring in startups into an organization. So SAP is one, so I can speak on SAP's behalf, that we have something called SAP IO, which is our fund and our foundry that's really looking to work with startups and founders in sort of three areas. One is from a B2B enterprise software perspective. Are we, finding founders that are helping with things like AR and VR and AI, machine learning and blockchain? And again, to my earlier point, how are their solutions and offerings, enhancing what SAP provides from a business application software perspective? Typically, we've kind of put out guidelines that founders and startups that would likely thrive in our environment, because it's not a fit for everyone all the time. And I think so to make it easier, we've said, are you sort of seed to Series B? And, do you possess product market fit, have an MVP? And then to the earlier point, 1 to 2 to 3 enterprise clients to kind of show some of that early success and where you can start to thrive within our ecosystem. And then I think lastly, which is, really important, is there's a sort of a commitment on your side to be part of our community, because I think one thing that's great about SAP and many corporations is we're opening up our network, opening up our mentors, our executives, our customers to sort of work with you to test, products, do the focus groups, get a little bit more understanding on, what works and what doesn't. So we've, asked for basic things like 2 to 3 days a week when you're in our cohort. I'm sure, Lisa can talk more about this. Are you coming to a pitch day or a demo day and coming to some of our workshops? And, the foundries have done extremely well in this model, because there's sort of clear guidelines on here's what we think that we need from you to thrive in our environment. And then, it's an easier way to see if there's even a partnership there to begin with, instead of kind of weeding through the behemoth of, how a lot of enterprises, it can be tough to figure that out. So, with SAP IO, I think it's been a really great, it's been a few years now that it's been up and running, and so many startups have come through. They still have relationships with us, many of them embedded into our solutions now, and we want to see more of that, and certainly with diverse founders as well. So that's kind of a little bit of a highlight on how SAP has, focused on it. But I would say I'm seeing this in many different organizations and tech companies as well.
Lisa, do you want to sort of expand on that a little more, and maybe also speak to some not so great, instances where, like that could sort of serve as lessons for anyone who's watching as well?
Sure, I'll take it all. So, so why don't we start with the lessons and then work our way to expand? It's interesting that Marla said that sometimes you can get caught in that vortex and you can't get people to the finish line. And very early on, as we were going through, we would go meet with someone and they'd say, oh, we'll do that for our women. Oh, we'll do for our people of color. Next thing you know, 20 meetings later, you're still trying to bring it to a close. So we said, you know what, we're not going to do that anymore. Well, we're going to go in and say, this is a use case that we think you can do right now. And so we started to plant the seed of landing and expanding. Otherwise, companies are so big and you don't have a lot of time. You have to be laser focused. As you know, Dee, the main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. The other is having a clear line on what we will and won't do. Because as a startup, you can like die death of 1,000 cuts of customization, For ours, it was, we don't cross the line when it comes to personalized data. So you have to know ahead of time what you will and won't do so you don't get caught in a conversation that doesn't make sense. Success criteria up front. If you agree to a pilot and at the end of the day, you don't know how you went, you're going to churn, right? And then that's wasted effort. And then understand your time to goal. We used to have year-long pilots and we're like, well, why are we doing that? You know much earlier if you're going to win. So that's why that lighthouse customer up front is so important. And then make sure that you can use their name. We learned earlier on, you can have a lot of success case, but if you can't use them, then there's no reference. And then don't hit yourself to one person, right? So within a company, you can get that one hook in, but you better start growing some tentacles, because if those people move, you will be shoot out of luck, as my kids say. But to the point of SAP and others, we've been fortunate to have great partners where different companies have different programs, but they're not always fruitful. And what's been great for us is that the ask, and we do make the ask, they surround us, as did Morgan Stanley, with folks that could accelerate our time to goal. So you have to do your diligence up front, but when you're in it, you got to take full advantage. And so if you think about product, if you think about customers, if you think about hiring, you know, partner with companies that are going to be willing to put the work in, and you have to be willing to participate and engage as well.
Such good advice. Thank you. Marla, do you want to share more about, now that you are sort of at Mastercard, so for a founder wanting to come into the Mastercard ecosystem, what advice would you give about the sort of culture at Mastercard and the sort of best way to tackle that and to work your way in?
Yeah, before, actually, let me chime in on the previous question too, while we're talking about it, because MasterCard actually has a program called Start Path, which sounds fairly similar to what April was talking about and what Lisa then responded to. And it's a part of the organization where MasterCard does work with small startup companies. It's called Start Path for a reason, right? And I've been getting to know MasterCard, where I've been at MasterCard for about a year now. So a year in a company that size, I am still very much learning my way around. But Start Path is a really interesting way in, and I do think that those formal programs like what April is talking about and like Start Path are actually helpful, because they have actually a formula in a lot of instances about the sequence of events, the kinds of interactions that you need to have. And so at MasterCard, one of the things that's important in Start Path is somewhere inside of the organization, there has to be some kind of sponsor for your kind of company. So you can be sponsored by the product team, or you could be sponsored by the IT, you could be sponsored by HR, philanthropy, you can be sponsored anywhere, but you do have to be sponsored somewhere. And if your organization if you don't have that, I think that's the thing, when you don't have a formal program, it's really hard to know that. But I think if you were to take away something from just listening to this, if you're working with a large corporation that doesn't have a program, figure out where inside of that organization you are solving a problem. If you're solving a problem about data and analytics, figure out how to get yourself plugged in and sponsored by the analytics team inside of that company. Because if you're talking to corporate development, trying to convince them about an analytical sale, and you don't have anybody in analytics talking about it, you're chugging uphill, right? It can be done, but it's a whole lot harder, right? Versus having a pull mechanism where somebody in the analytics team is saying, you know what, this thing is actually really interesting, shows a lot of promise. There's a new model here, we're really interested in it. And they tell corp dev that internally. That is a completely different game. That's a completely different conversation. So I definitely think keeping an eye on what those programs do and how they're structured as a way in, and then also as a model for how you might tackle a corporation that doesn't have it. That's an important thing to look for. I also want to echo Lisa's point on having an internal champion. It helps to have a person inside, right, that is pulling for you. But you cannot rest on those laurels. As soon as you get that one person, meet more people around that person. Like keep going, right? It's a lot to leverage. So to your question about being inside in large corporate now, I have always heard that it is very difficult to go from being a founder and running your own organization, as hard as it is to do that, right? As hard as it is to be a founder and run your own company and be responsible for finding all the resources and keeping the people and delivering on the mandate. It is also hard to reorient yourself culturally to go back into large corporate, because a lot of what I do now is about navigating Mastercard, right? It's not because I need to do something in order to get something to happen in the market, right? Like I have to move the chess pieces around inside of this corporation itself in order to get something done. And that requires a different way of understanding my role, right? And that's a hard adjustment. I will also readily admit, it turns out that I got used to being in charge really fast, right? Like I just was, I would show up in meetings and be like, all right, well, I'm here, so let's go, right? And they're like, actually, we're waiting for these 3 other people because there's a lot of people that are more senior than you now, right? I'm like, oh yeah, right. I forgot, right? that's how that goes. So there's a lot of kind of reorienting that goes into it. But there are also, one of the reasons I did it, right? And I wanted to go into an organization about gaining access to the platform, to the megaphone that some of these gigantic multinationals can bring to any given issue. And that is very, very difficult to replicate in a startup, no matter how successful you might be, right? There is just flat out a way that if you want to get some scale on something, you find something and you want to blow it out through a channel in very short order, there are very few things that do that as well as a giant multinational company. Getting their attention and getting to do it is one thing, but once you've got it, like you are done. I mean, it can run away from you, right? Like, so it's, that part is really powerful. And that was what was really compelling to me. And it got me over the hump of, okay, I'm not gonna, be in charge anymore and have to play well with others now. That's the adjustment.
I'm not sure I can do that again. So kudos to you.
I just have to double down though on that, Marla, because I
Yes.
think about one of April's colleagues had a meeting where they had brought in some different folks from sales, and it was the information that as a startup, I knew I couldn't get. And I remember at the end of that, I literally went back to my team. I was like, finally, we have the perspective that we've been waiting for. Like every person you affiliate with is about acceleration to goal. Right. And that means your knowledge, that means clearing pathways, introductions, whatever it is. But I think we underestimate sometimes knowledge, because it will inform decisions that you make or not make, or bets that you place or not place. And it's hard when you're running and building the bridges you're running on it, sometimes to step back so that you can accelerate forward.
Guys, thank you so much for all of this incredible information. I want to end with one more question and then open up to questions from the audience. So guys, if you have questions, please throw them. I see there's a lot in the chat, so I'm assuming we'll get through all of that or put them in the Q&A. When we started this conversation, I mentioned sort of the issue really of sort of diversity within corporations. Like we've just been speaking more generally about, the sort of levers to success, but the issue obviously goes deeper in that corporations are really relying on the same networks, and that's leaving a lot of founders out. And so I want to sort of end by asking what you think needs to change on the client side, on the corporation side, to just ensure that there is sort of more fairness, more equity, and just more open access to these sorts of partnerships. So I'd love everyone to take that one. Start with you, April.
I mean, so much, but I think, and I can speak a little bit to the other line of business I was in before SuccessFactors, which is Ariba, which is our procurement line of business. And procurement, as it relates to the topic of diversity and some inequities that we see, I think is a really powerful lever. And I think I would love to see more corporations, make not just talk. I think this year especially, we've seen a lot of discussion on talking is not enough. Action is very important. And so at SAP, we've made a pretty, specific, movement towards actually putting our action behind our words. And one thing that's been really exciting to see is if you think about the buying power, the spending power of corporations, it's in the billions, right? In terms of what they buy, whether it's office supplies or the direct materials, services, whatever it may be. And so SAP has made a stand to say that by 2025, that we would, in 5 years, we would, and it's called 5 by 5 by 2025, that 5% of our procurement spend would go towards social and diverse vendors. And, we had obviously always made that part of our purpose and our focus, but not so much to make a stand publicly and be held accountable to it. So I think whatever that is that organizations can do, I think it's a responsibility that we have to use our professional and personal capital to be able to say, here's where we're actually going to take a stand and some action behind what we do. And then on the fund with SAP.io, it's called No Boundaries, and it's also a commitment to say that 40% of our investable capital would also go, because of the numbers, the 0.006%, that we see with women of color that are startups, et cetera, that we would make a stand there as well to look at making sure that capital also goes to diverse founders. So those are two examples of I think many that we're starting to see in SAP, and there'll be more to come. And I'd love to see other corporations do the same.
Yeah, pledges, commitments, put hard numbers, percentages behind it.
And publish,
And publish them, absolutely. So we can hold everyone to account. Lisa.
I would like to see companies open up their criteria of what qualifies for minority-owned or woman-owned, because many times it doesn't work in the favor of venture-backed companies. Because if you're going to hold it to, you got to have some high percentage, then the minute you raise money, you fall below that threshold, but you still remain who you are and what you're focused on. So regardless of whether you raise the capital or not. And so I think they have to be more equitable, even in what that rubric may be.
I love that. Marla.
Yeah, the thing I would add to this, and probably echoes, I think, both of what April and Lisa just said. At Mastercard, I've been working on evaluating some of the criteria that Mastercard uses, because in a lot of instances, the criteria is doing very specific work, right? So for example, Mastercard had, and I'm probably sharing a little inside pool here, but I'm happy to share it. Somebody will yell at me later. That in order to be in StartPath, you had to have raised some capital. And I think the shortcut work that was doing was, it meant somebody somewhere had vetted this company and found it met their threshold. And so we, Mastercard, can rely on that assessment. But we just talked about the fact that 0.006% of that capital is ever going to go to businesses led by Black women, for example. And so how many Black women are ever going to get into StartPath, right? If it's dependent on your ability to raise capital. So what I shared with our team internally is, we're going to have to do our own work. We're actually going to have to do the vetting. We can't rely on the fact that somebody else has vetted it and use this as a shortcut, because it will mean that we are replicating and reinforcing the exact issue that we are trying to change in this arena. And I think people, they just didn't think about it, right? It just wasn't on their radar screen, right? Whereas is very much on mine, because I've spent 6 years beating my head against the capital apparatus, trying to figure out why I couldn't get some capital to shake out and land on me. And if we don't have people internally who can evaluate, like, hey, what are the criteria we're using for this? This will not change, right? So I think that is an incredibly important piece of this. Another example of that criteria is Mastercard's a global company and likes to work with other global companies. And so one of the things we always look at is, if we want to offer this product, this solution, this technology, we need to offer it through an organization that can join us everywhere that we are. name a small company, right, that's going to hold hands with Mastercard in North America and Latin America and in Middle East and Asia and on the African continent. That's not, there's that by definition is not a small company, right? And so while it means a little bit more work, it means that we allow more people in if we decide we can have regional partners so that small companies can actually ever clear that criteria and be eligible to work with us. And then the third thing, I think, which echoes some of what April was talking about, I've catch myself saying things that I never thought I'd say, like there's some interesting things happening in supply chain, right? That I'm like, whoever would, I would never have thought that I would be interested in that, right? But it turns out that there's some interesting things happening in supply chain. And one of them is, how do you simplify working with us, right? So we talked a lot about, Lisa talked about making her solution simple. I dare you to get through Mastercard's due diligence and onboarding process to become a supplier, right? And I have said, like, guys, it takes organizations a year to get on the list of who's qualified to even be chosen by the rest of us inside of Mastercard that are doing our work. That can't, small company can't invest a year in trying to get on this platform and then wait for somebody to select them after they've gone through this exercise just to be considered. So how do we shift that entire process, right? What are we trying to do with that process? And then find ways to accomplish that without having to put people through the ringer, right? Like in order to even be able to work with us. So those are things that, I feel really good about being able to walk around and just bring my own experience and perspective as an outsider, right? And new to the company, and say, like, I don't know why that has to be that way, right? Let's figure out how to do that and make somebody eligible for consideration in 4 weeks at most, right? Like, or 6 weeks at the longest. So, those are some of the examples I'd highlight.
I mean, a year-long due diligence and onboarding process sounds like hell on earth.
Right. I can see the trauma. I can see the trauma, Dee. You're like,
okay, we're going to take some questions. Okay, what is the best way to develop a relationship if you do not participate in any of these programs? So how do you find, well, I think, Lisa, you sort of answered this, just through your contacts, through your ecosystem.
Yeah, some warm calls, a person that you've met in person somewhere, ideally, maybe in pre-COVID, you've met in person. But having some way to be able to have a familiar face or warm start to the relationship, I think is going to be critical. The theory that you're going to get in on just a cold call or something, that's going to be a tough road. So I definitely encourage finding some networked way in.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think the champion that you have, and hopefully many champions you have internally, is a big help. And I also think, you have to look at the trends that big corporations are looking at. In the line of business I'm in, HR, we're talking about the future of work. And the future of work, as we all saw this year, is very different than what we thought it was going to be. And so if you have a solution or a service or an offering where it's that experience gap that is not being offered with tech companies like SAP, and this is, how Lisa and I got connected. Our founder right now is focused on the future of work. So whether that's, internal talent and mobility, culture and D&I, and how do we help organizations with that, agile team management, contingent workforce, there's so many incredible founders and startups that are offering things. I think you have to kind of do a bit of that puzzle piece and match what you think your offering could be with whatever tech company or whatever company, financial institution it may be, and then find that champion. And I think you'd be surprised that it doesn't, especially now with what you're doing, Dee, there's so many more opportunities for access. And I think it just takes that little bit of work to put those pieces together. Connecting the dots is so important. And I think, Dee, you do that very well. So hopefully we'll see more of that in the years to come.
I hope so too. There's a great question here about the excitement of a corporation approaching an early stage startup can overshadow the wisdom needed to vet the interest. What guardrails should an early startup put in place to protect their interests and not waste time? A lot of sage was nodding here.
So that's why I said in the beginning, because it can be enticing. It's like, ooh, somebody big really likes me. So it's like, what is your non-negotiables? Lean on your board if you have a board, because sometimes they can check that really quick. And just ask yourself, what are you really going to gain and where do you have the sponsorship? I mean, I just cannot emphasize that enough. And exactly what is it that they are proposing? Because everything is an opportunity cost, every last single iota of a second. And so you better understand what the ROI is. And sometimes you do have to say no. You got to have the courage to do that.
A couple of people raised their hands, Candice and Ayodele. I don't know if you still wanted to ask questions, but I am allowing you to speak as God from on high. So if you would like to say something, that has been enabled. Okay, so we'll see. Feel free to jump in. Okay, gosh, there's so much here. Let's see. Okay, as far as funding recorporations, are these grants or conventional investments? I am building a financial literacy product and would love to partner with Mastercard.
Yeah, so I'll say both, right? It depends on what you're doing. We make grants, and I am in the grant making part of the organization, and that is involved. That works. That in that instance, we work with nonprofits, and we make programmatic grants about the delivery of specific programs and with measurable outcomes to solve persistent problems mostly around access to networks, right, and participation in our digital economy. But we also have entire commercial side of the organization, including in corporate development, like I mentioned, in StartPath, in our treasury team, where we make just flat out investments. We make equity driven, return seeking, profit maximizing kinds of capital available to drive various interests that Mastercard may have. So I think it depends on what you're trying to accomplish and what the right way in might be. And if you come in through the wrong channel, people are pretty good about being able to say, this is not a right fit for us. Let me introduce you to this other part of the organization, and then they can vet it and see if it's a fit for them. So it definitely depends on the type of organization, but in this day and age, most major companies will be able to meet where, whatever kind of company or organization you might be, whether that's philanthropic and nonprofit or commercial and capital seeking.
I'm just like looking at the, all the sort of intros in the comments. There are so many great companies in here. I mean, corporations, you are missing out. Okay, there was a general question about, which is probably, we have 2 minutes. Where do you find a list of companies who've committed to diversity? I mean, it better be everyone, but I mean, I don't know if there is.
So one of the places you might look, I was looking at, I think the Business Roundtable has collected on their website all of the announcements, at least in this moment, that have been made around racial equity and racial justice. And if you wanted to see all of it in one place, you do have to go through and click on each link, but they have aggregated all the links. And as far as I can tell, they've been keeping the most current, up-to-date list in the large corporate space of all of the announcements that have been made by everybody across various sectors. So I would recommend that as a place to start if you want a list of the large corporates. Mm-hmm. I'm sure there are other places where they've aggregated it up as well, but that's one that comes to mind where I've looked there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's the $1 billion roundtable you're talking about, Marla. Yeah, that's what I was going to say too. There's been, solid commitments of companies that have committed to over $1 billion in their spend, and some 2-3+ billion of their spend to diverse and social causes and founders. So I would definitely look there. It's something that we look at a lot at SAP as well.
Amazing. I didn't know that list existed, so I will be looking myself. Mm-hmm. I cannot thank you enough for this truly helpful, informative, detailed conversation. I really, really appreciate your candor and wisdom and insights. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Thanks to everyone who joined. I don't know if we can find a way to connect everybody, but you should all at least maybe connect on LinkedIn. We have a Black Women Raise LinkedIn page, so you could connect around that, maybe, not to plug, but I am. All right, so we are going to wrap up there, and have a great afternoon, everyone, and thank you.
Thank you, Dee.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
everybody.